Welcome, everybody. My name is Randy Gregg. I'm the Executive Director of the Portland Parks Foundation. And welcome to tonight's presentation of Back to Square One, Reimagining O'Brien Square. Tonight is Urbanism in Motion, Mobile Architecture, Street Plazas, and the Green Loop. I want to thank our sponsor of this lecture series, US Bank. And this is the fifth in a six-part series, epic series that we've been doing on kind of the issues around O'Brien Square, and we've paired up visitors who will be coming out for our larger effort with locals to talk about various aspects of O'Brien Square and public space. I'm going to do a quick overview of our larger effort. For those of you who haven't seen this, I'll try to make it pretty quick. Once I get the right screen up here shared. One thing I'd like to start with a small remembrance. And I bring this up because of a really important public space that this person created for us. Sorry, I'm having problems with, there we go. Thomas Hacker passed away this morning, and some of you won't know who he is, but I looked at our guest list and a lot of people do. He was a very prominent architect who retired some years ago, but he and a landscape architect named Doug Macy designed the PSU Urban Center. And I bring it up just because of our collaborators, Portland State University, and this important public space. And I'll talk a little more about some of the history that Doug also played in Portland public spaces. But I just wanted to acknowledge Tom's passing because he was a really important character to our city. Served on the design commission for years and has designed a lot of prominent buildings in Portland, a number of libraries, and then he and Doug collaborated on this kind of the heart of the PSU campus, and one of the great Portland collaborations between bureaus and the university and the city. So please join me in giving best to his colleagues and his family. So our larger effort is really to ask some fundamental questions. What should a new downtown public space be in 2023? Who's it for? What is it for? Who should design it? And who can bring it to life? Our answer is you. And this is a collaboration between the Portland Parks Foundation, the PSU Center for Public Interest Design, the Harvard Loeb Fellowship, and Portland Parks and Rec. We have a great group of sponsors behind this effort, among them the Loeb Fellowship Alumni Association, the North Star Civic Foundation, Metro, ZGF, Travel Portland, Multnomah County, the Schlesinger Family Foundation, Project, Henneberry Eddy Architects and GBD, and then we've got some great support from MBP Capital and the Metropolitan Group. So thank you to all of those sponsors. Next week, it's coming up fast, Wednesday, March 8th, we will open our community vision process with an open house at the former Finnegan's toy store right across the street from O'Brien Square. And they'll be open all day, and people can come in. The Center for Public Interest Design's creating a great group of interactive exhibits to help people sort of visualize what their ideas for O'Brien Square. And we'll have some focus groups going on. And then all of that effort will go toward creating some designs and ideas, some preliminary ideas for O'Brien Square. And we'll share those out Saturday, March 11th. And to give you a little sense of how the process is going to work, March 8th is a big intake. We have a survey that we put out. We'll have the open house. We have focus groups that will be contributing. And then Center for Public Interest Design and PPR and the Loebs will sort of sift through this and try to find the synergies and the complements between those ideas. And then the Center for Public Interest Design, the Loebs, and a group of designers from local firms will visualize those ideas. And then on the 11th, we'll invite the public to critique them, tell us what we got right, what we could do better. And that'll all feed into eventually a report and a series of proposals that we'll make to the city. So that's sort of just a basic overview. As you know, a number of people have been to several of the lectures. We've been doing this series. You can find them all on our YouTube channel. Jessica, if you can put that in the chat, that would be great. So you can go back and see some of these. And then we have one more on Wednesday, which is an equally exciting one. As some of you know, tonight we're really talking about a kind of more mutable city, about change in the city. O'Brien Square, for many, many years was kind of a lonely place. Not a lot of things happening there. And then, it changed really over the course of a year. I was working in the building next door and watched it happen. And it was largely due to the emergence of the food cart culture on the adjacent block. And this is actually in the depths of the 2008 recession. And suddenly food carts sprung up there, 50 in total by a couple of years later. And O'Brien really became a different place, at least certainly during the daytime. It was a very popular eating spot, and the two had a great synergy between them. And it just goes to show, one, how quickly a city can change with small interventions, sometimes by just letting things happen, and two, how much a park can change when you have active uses around it. As you know, during the pandemic, we've also bred a new kind of culture in the streets, which Art Pierce tonight will talk about, and with the number of street plazas that have sprung up. And that really saved a lot of restaurants and animated our city in an entirely different way. And Art's going to talk about this, but PBOT is going to be looking at a number of spaces around O'Brien for future plazas and for connections to the Green Loop. And then lastly, we'll hear about the Green Loop. This is a visualization of it from a competition that was done some years ago and really kind of brought it to the life in the public mind. And one of the things that was inherent to the design of this concept was these ideas of circles of influence on the Green Loop, that there could be infrastructure as in terms of hard, streetscape changes to the circle that is the Green Loop, the loop. But also there could be activations that are done by businesses and property owners nearby. So really bringing this idea of a kind of potluck to the table of the Green Loop. And that's in a sense what we're trying to do with O'Brien Square, is create a kind of cultural, civic, community potluck. What can we all bring to it to make it a really active space? So our first speaker tonight is one of the Loeb Fellows who is visiting, Jennifer Siegel. Get my notes here. She is with the Office of Mobile Design, which she founded in LA, and focuses on portable, demountable, relocatable structures from homes to schools, stores. She also explores prefabrication, taking advantage of industrial processes to create more efficient and nimble architecture. She is the Chief Development Officer and Managing Partner also of Wilderness, a company described as the quote, Tesla of real estate, for disrupting the real estate industry and spearheading the sector's transition from carbon intense to carbon neutral. Jennifer was honored in 2016 as the first American to win the Arc Vision Prize, Women in Architecture, an international award for women in architecture. Jennifer was unanimously chosen by the jury for being, quote, a fearless pioneer in the research and development of prefabricated construction systems. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jennifer. One rule of the road, we'll open the chat for your comments after the speakers, but please hold your questions and put them in the Q&A, because that's what we'll be using to tee up your questions. So with that, take it away, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Randy. How's my screen, everybody? You should just be seeing one image. Is that happening?
More or less.
More or less. Less is more sometimes. Well, let's just rock and roll. Enter full screen. How about that? Is that
There we
better?
go.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me. Portland Parks Foundation, Randy Gregg, a fellow Loeb, um, that we've gotten to know each other over the many years. The gift of the Loeb Fellowship, if anyone doesn't know about it, it's a full year ride at Harvard and MIT, where they sponsored 10 fellows to and give them opportunity for independent study, usually mid-career professionals, people working in the built environment. And the gift of it is really what the aftermath and what happens once you're post fellow and you develop this amazing network of incredibly creative, talented people from around the world. And we're looking forward to participating in a week-long charrette in Portland very soon. And Art and Keith, I'm so pleased to be here as part of this panel. So I'm just going to jump into this conversation that has to do with mobility and urbanism in motion, making the city mutable. Here I go. So anyone who lives in Los Angeles is on some level aware of issues of mobility. As a nomad and occasional Angelino, I have been consumed with the question of what kind. Not only am I concerned with environmental consequences of automobility or dromology, a term coined by Paul Virilio, meaning the science of travel, but I'm equally interested in using design to affect social mobility. These are 2 books that I have edited over a few years. In fact, you could say that my preoccupation with devising portable structures grew out of my family's own economic history. My grandfather, the image on the left, had a hot dog cart in New York, in Coney Island, and 2 generations later, while putting myself through graduate school at SciArc in Los Angeles, I did as well. So it was not a leap, but a logical move when I founded Office of Mobile Design in 1998 as a way of actively engaging in designing non-permanently sited structures that move across and rest lightly upon the land. And this is an image of my studio in downtown Los Angeles for many years, adjacent to a very active train yard. My work seeks to rethink and reestablish methods of building that contrast with the generic clutter that increasingly crowds our landscape. I'm inspired by Sant Elia's Marinetti's Futurist Manifesto that, quote, we no longer believe in the monumental, the heavy and static, and have enriched our sensibilities with a taste for lightness, transience, and practicality. This desire for the active, mobile, and everywhere dynamic that characterized the Italian futurist machine aesthetic infuses my work at OMD, shown here in the rock climber whose dynamic form responds to the static rock face, or the parkour's efficient and quick ability to overcome obstacles. And while architecture's purpose remains constant, providing inspiration and shelter from the natural elements and community among its inhabitants, mobile and portable architecture herald the dawn of the age of new nomadism. The applications and uses are limitless. These buildings have no borders. Diversity of material palette, design style, and transportation method are varied. Here's Buckminster Fuller with his Dymaxion dome and riff on the Dymaxion dome and the Dymaxion car, a 3-wheeled vehicle that was a precursor to the RV, designed by Fuller, but with its rear wheel in the back and had a tendency to flip over as a kind of thinking of a new age trailer park. And while mobile architecture then can be defined not merely in terms of movable structures, but rather as a way of intelligently inhabiting a specific environment at a specific time and place, that better reacts to increasingly frequent social environmental shifts. These fluvial forms are expressed best in the extreme sports world, where surfers meld with the breaking surface, the sea becomes the form giver, or the intuition and innovation of the skateboarder working off the urban infrastructure. The meta or experience age whets our appetite for the exploration of the unknown. As inquisitive social beings and innate explorers of the universe, we are standing at a new threshold of curiosity and movement. Biological and technological advancements reveal themselves in our everyday lives, echoing prophecies and environmental visions from American pulp science fiction. Architecture today rolls, flows, inflates, breathes, expands, multiplies, and contracts, finally hoisting itself up, as Archigram predicted at the end of the 1960s, to go in search of its next user. And these are a couple images from Archigram, Walking City, and the Kushicle of self-propelled and fully wearable architecture that could open up and expand, which I love the idea of. And here's a couple of images that I just thought I would show as inspiration, artists that I think are working in very with temporality, lightness, transience. Lucy Orta and Wade Dropner, some ideas around skins and tents, wearable ideas that I just adore. Some older images having to do with inflatables and pneumatics. From the 1970s, ideas of kind of instant cities. This thinking about how information will be, if not now, very soon, impregnated into our brains, and the question of, what will space be like, and how much will we ultimately have physical space. And of course, this image of the metaverse, a fully digital AI visual VR experience of space, and what will public space become? Will it be, will there still be trees, or will we be sitting with goggles on, or will be physically interacting with each other, or some kind of a hybrid, which probably will be in the future. And I'm going to just quickly go through some images from the work that I've done in my office since 1998, ideas that have specifically to do with mobility, trucks, inflatables, pneumatics, prefab. This one is a recent project we did for a museum exhibition, a little electric vehicle that can pop up and become a habitable space, can be used for a vendor, or I guess what is now the new nomad. Ideas about upcycling, repurposing, taking Wally Byman's Airstream and kind of rethinking it in terms of its skin. This was a sound recording studio. Similar idea about how taking something that arrives in a shipping container or a box or some kind of compact space, and then expands as it arrives on site. Here, this was for a Shakespeare theater, kind of rethinking the format of what that would look like. A couple of student projects. I'm also a professor at USC in the School of Architecture, where I had them thinking about food trucks of the future. This one delivering donuts in your daily commute. Or a couple examples of just kind of rethinking the food truck and what that space might feel like, whether it has to do with materiality, coming into a neighborhood to help rebuild, or sushi truck. Materials and innovation, very much about this work, lightweight, smart materials, and things that have different types of skins, things that can open up, expand, contract, as I mentioned, smart spaces where you plug in, and you do that in a public space. So how do these kind of smaller interventions get used in public domains? Some early work, working with architecture students in design build studios at Woodbury University, taking an old truck and transforming it into a mobile classroom that teaches children about the life of a tree. And on the heels of that, another type, taking an old manufactured home and creating a construction center that could come in and train people in construction. So maybe the park, the idea of the park is that there's many different uses with different interventions that occur over time. I've become somewhat of an expert in modular and offsite construction using mostly factory-built steel frame modules that come together in a variety of different ways, and also panelized systems. This was a project I did with a group of students at Taliesin. That's a hybrid of SIP panels on the walls and then a steel modular frame. This is another project showing the idea that, you know, as long as you fit the width of the road, which typically the ease is 8 feet wide, you can go up to 16 feet wide in California. Your heights are around 12'6" max typically. Length is probably the most negotiable of those sizes. This was a show house I had in Venice, California for many years to give people an example of what a single module would look like, using more green materials, polycarbonate, bamboo, natural ventilation, skylights. And then some examples of shipping containers, transforming trucks. This was an experiment on myself in my house, just taking an old truck and attaching it and turning it into an addition to the house. And lastly, some ideas around using shipping containers. This is a house I did in downtown Los Angeles for the owner of the brewery, the largest live-work colony in Los Angeles, taking all of the old discarded materials on the right-hand side and on the left-hand side, repurposing it into the owner's garden and home, which looks something like this. Taking up all of the old tarmac and bringing in, you know, butterflies. It's pretty nice. Some of these grain trailers were used as koi fish ponds. So most of these materials have all been upcycled in a variety of different ways. And that's it.
Thanks, Jennifer. Great to have our imagination stretched. I start to think about what we could do to upcycle the bricks in O'Brien Square. And then also, I think we should show that donut delivery to Voodoo Donuts could open up completely new horizons. So thanks for that. Next up, Art Pierce, who's planning and projects director for PBOT. And he's guides transportation ideas through long-range planning and policy and project development and construction stages. But his group has overseen the repurposing of so many streets in Portland to plazas. He also can sometimes be found singing and playing mandolin in those plazas, as I've witnessed in my nearby one over on 28th. So maybe we can tease a song out of Art. As well as a talk about what PBOT's doing. So take it away, Art.
All right, thanks, Randy. Yeah, actually, that's been one of my favorite outcomes of these public spaces, is inspiring a group of friends to just pop up at various ones over the past couple of years. So, well, let me quickly share. And there we go. All right, well, I'm going to take us to the streets, quite literally, and talk about how mutability and flexibility can be brought to our public realm environment and in our thinking as a city. One of the great lessons, I think, certainly for urban planners, but I think for participants in cities over the last couple of years, has been the value of space, and particularly the value of space outside, for health, for community, and for connection, and the sort of inspiration and creativity that's brought to that space when we pull the limitations and the restrictions away from those responses. These are, a variety of types of installations that we saw in Portland during the COVID pandemic. Saying we want you to come out in this space, and we value your inspiration and your contribution, flipped the narrative on its head to one of defensiveness and one instead of combined vision and sharing. So I think it leads us at this moment, and I think particularly around O'Brien Square and the way the green loop surrounding it, to question, what if instead of streets looking like this, and this being the norm of our understanding of what our streets, particularly in downtown, look like, to maybe ones that are inspired by potential community uses, potentially for play and for recreation of all ages, or streets for family, specifically designed to draw in the young and the old to fully feel valued and seen in those spaces. And I think in particular also streets centering equity, thinking about who are we making these spaces for? How do we instill comfort and belonging for a whole variety of Portlanders as they can see themselves in these spaces we're creating, rather than seeing themselves erased from those environments. I think, one of my key realizations is that, Portland's always talked about its living room being Pioneer Square, but Portland needs many living rooms. This is just one of many spaces that need to be activated and enlivened, and where there's a variety of players pouring their energy into these spaces. And we have a really myriad of spaces already emerging in terms of the vibrant public spaces that the PBOT team is working on together. We have existing right-of-way and plaza assets that PBOT has not lifted up historically, and that there's an opportunity to reinstill those partnerships with community-based organizations, with BIPOC-owned businesses, to create real intentional space for art and urban design, as well as micro entrepreneurs and enterprise. Great example of My People's Market, bringing out vendors and micro entrepreneurs into these spaces over the last couple of years. Couple sort of nearby and great examples. One, as Randy was mentioning, Southeast Ankeny, where my band has indeed appeared a couple times, which has been fun, but also in Inner Southeast at Portland Opera, and then nearby this, the site that we're really focusing in this conversation on, of Pride Plaza, seeing both a cultural identity lifted up in that, and also the valuing of outdoor dining and outdoor public space really being acknowledged and really celebrated both by the public sector and the private sector over the last couple of years. And we really have seen these over a whole variety of locations. 11 full block plazas were painted over the last couple of years, 30 plus side street plazas, and over 200 spaces painted to make space for public activity. So when we look at O'Brien Square, I think it's important to recognize both that O'Brien Square itself is a palette and a potential place for us to pour our inspiration and our co-investment, but also the relevance of the Green Loop, which I know will be talked about more right after me, but as a place that is both passing through and around this area, but also can start to blend the environments in terms of design and use from public street and private park space into maybe one conception that is really understood as just one environment that is designed to work better together. One great sort of coming opportunity is that PBOT and Parks were successful in an application to the US EDA. The majority of that funding is focused on the Pride Plaza area, just a little bit to the west of O'Brien Square and the Green Loop. But part of that application was the conversion of the streets surrounding O'Brien Square along the Green Loop into more activated and public space use. So there's a real opportunity for that co-investment cycle to connect the park also to these surrounding areas and to the Ankeny food cart areas and such as well. And we have a great, in terms of, PBOT, we're understood as one that is investing in, physical infrastructure often, but we also are we're not unfamiliar with mutability and providing flexibility. And one of the great partnerships has been with Better Blocks, where we're producing a vehicle for inspiration to be poured into street spaces where we can temporarily shut them down and hopefully show how to vehicle use, and hopefully show how the restriction of vehicle use and the opening up of community use can become permanent fixtures in a variety of communities. And what we really have seen is a whole variety of uses come out when we do provide these closed down spaces. Not dissimilar to last Thursdays on Alberta or first Thursdays in the Pearl. There's a variety of spaces when we open up street space that we see an outpouring of energy and interest and desire to use. A lot of these start out small. This is, Pride Plaza, started out as a series of really small, this might even been on parking day, I think it was, that initially showed the potential for some space to be converted, that then grew into the more still temporary but more permanent and inspired installation that's there now, and similar in community streets and spaces as well. One of the things I find really most interesting about this is we have a sort of standardized set of stakeholders in our minds around who has the right to describe what should happen in streets. And it's really about little bits of real estate in which people have very strong opinions about the parking or the sidewalk use or the number of vehicle lanes that are allowed, or whether or not there's transit or bike lanes on that space. And if we're going to be creating public space, we're moving away from understanding street space as a transportation asset conversation to one that is really talking about community space. And one of the exciting parts is the world's wide open for us. The real challenge is then, whose space is this? And what required investments, what required combinations of daily actions make that space successful is sort of the new wild frontier for us in terms of converting street space and candidly park space into a space that people, rather than see themselves as a consumer, they see themselves as a collaborator and a co-investor, because there's not enough tax dollars to make public space successful. It has to be born out of a shared inspiration in which adjacent business owners see this space as an asset, and storefront businesses help be eyes on the streets, and various community groups see this space as a space they want to populate with activities and cultural events. This will also require money. And so I think it's important to understand that there's a whole variety of use and funding models that help co-create space that kind of work their way up from sort of the space we're in now, uncurated, to eventually big ideas like incorporating these ideas into an enhanced service district or some big public-private partnership. And so PBOT's excited to be a collaborator in this space and excited to have our staff as part of this design charrette process and hopefully part of making something great together. All right, I'll pass it back to Randy. Thanks, Randy. Oh, I think you're muted, Randy.
Thank you. Great presentation, Art. Really great to see the work and see this sort of broad overview. And we'll drill down. I have a lot of questions for you, and I'm sure the audience will too. So with that, we will move on to Keith Jones. Keith is the executive director of the Friends of the Green Loop, a nonprofit devoted to bringing the planned Central City 7-mile bike and pedestrian connection to life. Keith is an amazingly patient and tenacious urban advocate. His support for both the Green Loop and for the Alder Street food carts. He is seen through politics, bureaucracy, and a pandemic that's resulted in the cart blocks, the food cart pod over at Ankeny West Plaza. And he's also done a lot of work, by the way, on Right to Dream 2 over in the Lloyd district. Amazing work in terms of finding a long-term home for that self-managed homeless village. Prior to the Friends of the Green Loop, Keith was an entrepreneur who specialized in the fields of marketing, economic development, and travel and tourism. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Keith.
Thanks, Randy. Appreciate that. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Green Loop and then elements of what Jennifer talked about and Art's work too. So I'll talk a little bit about food carts and the work that we've done there. Let me just share my screen real quick. Okay, is that viewable, Randy? Can you see that okay?
Yeah, looking good.
So the Green Loop came out of early community sessions for the Central City 2035 plan. And it was looking at creating community spaces within the city. And through that, this loop emerged as a concept. It was eventually adopted with the Central City 2035 plan in 2018. And it is not, it's in process right now. There are pieces of it. If you know the Tillicum Bridge, that is a piece of the Green Loop. The new Blumenauer Bridge is a piece of the Green Loop. But you know, what is the Green Loop is still a question, and Art's team is working on some of that. The one thing that we sort of want to stress is that it is not a 6-mile bike path through the city. It's not just the infrastructure. It's all the stuff around it. The stuff that Randy was talking about earlier in the concepts of the potluck. But basically, if you think of this as more or less a 6-mile pedestrian path that connects a series of community spaces. Just so you know, you can imagine something more like this than, you know, a big green bike lane going throughout the central city. Green Loop goes through and sort of defines the borders of what's considered central city. It goes through several neighborhoods: Old Town Pearl District, the downtown core, PSU, the South Waterfront, jumps over across Tillicum Crossing into Central East Side, along Central East Side until it gets over to Lloyd, and then jumps back across on the Broadway Bridge. The Friends of Green Loop is a community-based organization, though, and we advocate for the development of the Green Loop. We partner with community organizations and we help promote it, doing things like this today. In the future, it might fund, manage, and even program pieces of the Green Loop. We sort of keep as our strategic pillars accessibility and inclusion, economic development, and placemaking in our work. I want to switch over to this section of town and a little bit about the work that I did nearby O'Brien, called the Cart Blocks. I was called in pretty early on to testify for the development of a piece of the Green Loop that was being done by the Ritz-Carlton. And so to go down there and take a look at, create some notes for my testimony, I walked down to the site and sort of to my horror discovered that that was the Alder Street food cart pod. That was the oldest and largest food cart pod in the city. It was home to 55 small businesses, primarily immigrant owned. And these are important to our culture. This is important to tourism, and it's important to our economy. So I was very concerned about this and started looking around for some allies to find how could we find a new home for this. And through those conversations, someone said, have you talked to Randy Gregg? And Randy had come up with the idea of a culinary corridor, which was to say that these spaces that the food carts occupy are temporary. They're parking lots downtown that will eventually be developed. So if we really do care about them, we need to find a more permanent place for these businesses. And so he pitched it to City Council. And the idea was to push them, to put them into the streets. And maybe that could be along the Green Loop. That's the conversation we started having. And City Council approved that. And we got to work. And that entailed taking those food cart owners at Alder Street around and showing them possible locations and hearing what their concerns were and hearing the possibilities of what we could do. And that was with PBOT. And eventually we settled on this sort of small park in the corner, the south end of the North Park blocks that had no name, but we started calling it Ankeny West. And it was within a 5-minute walk of the former location down here, Alder Street, and then O'Brien's here, Powell's is here. All these are hotels. So it's pretty centrally located, and it's along Burnside. So the concept was to continue that culinary corridor model, which was to put these carts in the streets and put them around this park. And maybe we could utilize that park and maybe even help to revitalize that park. So that took, I'm just going to skip forward because that was 2 years of advocacy, 2 years for the city to figure out how to do this. And we finally got the okay, let's move forward in the middle of a pandemic. So everyone sort of came together around this. The cart owners who'd been in storage for 2 years took a lot of pride in this space, made sure that their carts were in tip-top shape. The community came out, painted murals. It's the mayor came down, helped out. Everyone put in something to this park. And it went from this, which was a boarded up park that was heavily vandalized, to this. It's not overnight, but that took a lot of work. And it's now an active, vibrant space. We have added new roofs to those buildings. We repaired the sewer there, which allowed us to make the restrooms functional again. We added outdoor seating, a bike town docking station, and bike racks because we care about active transportation along the Green Loop. And we've just recently added alcohol service. This summer, we'll have a beer garden there. We maintain the park as part of our permit. So anytime there's graffiti, I'm usually down there cleaning it off myself. And I'm very happy to say that, you know, we would, as soon as something like this would happen, we would clean it up immediately. And we don't get hit as much anymore. This is now more like maybe once a month. And the break-ins that we started to have very early on has also subsided over time because it's an active, vibrant space. Those carts are down there every single day from 8 a.m. in the morning to sometimes 9, 10 o'clock at night. And every month so far has been better than the last one. So slowly but surely, once people found out where this was, we started getting return customers. And then, of course, with Burnside, we started getting people when they were traveling to Portland, going to Powell's and, you know, walking down to Voodoo Donuts, stopping by and enjoying the carts. So a lot of pressure has been placed on these. You know, the carts have been seen as the key to revitalizing downtown. And I think for a good reason. I mean, right now, you know, the Eco Northwest report just came out and it shows that downtown Portland is the slowest to recover from the pandemic. And that's because there's not a lot going on down there, but these carts are thriving just like they did in the last recession. So perhaps the key is not just, you know, with food carts, but in other spaces. I wanted to sort of show real quick, and this, I'll try to be as quick as I can with this, but this is a little bit of a deep dive. What makes up a food cart? A lot of people think that these are extremely mobile, but they're not. They actually require quite a bit of infrastructure. And well, I would say a couple of the main components is you need to have power, and that's a 50 amp hookup for those. You have to have water, and usually that's stored in a water tank there, but you have a water supply that comes in. And then you have gray water, which is the runoff from the sink and things like that needs to be collected. And there's a tank underneath the carts that does that, but it can only be as big as the water tank. So this fills up maybe once every 2 days. And what they end up doing is putting them in these big gray cubes. And then those get picked up and emptied maybe twice a month by service. However, and this is important for the future of carts downtown, those are being phased out. And so soon we won't be allowed to have those anymore, which means one of two things. You need either a direct sewer connect, or you need to keep them, keep your gray water in this gray water tank and empty it more frequently. This is problematic for a couple of reasons. One is that there are only 2 gray water service providers in the downtown core right now, and they are already overworked. The second is that this more frequent emptying means that their overhead will go up about $300 to $400 a month for a food cart owner. This is what we're doing right now at the cart blocks. We have to add dump stations. which is the direct sewer line. And the gray wire goes into the dump stations, and then it goes into a grease interceptor and then into the sewer. This is what the site looks like with all of the electricity and the dump stations. We have to actually run hoses underneath the sidewalk and then into the park where the dump stations reside. We can't put those dump stations in the street. The reason I bring this up is originally we thought we could do a lot of food cart infrastructure in the street, and it turns out we can't. You need an actual space to do that. So this becomes problematic and important as we move forward, looking at our food cart culture downtown. These blue squares here represent other food cart pods in the downtown core. And these three right here, this is Pioneer Square, so that's like 3 or 4 carts up there. But these are the only ones that are still around from before. And they're both managed, all 3 are managed by the same company. And if you've seen the Willamette Week article recently, that was the company. They were actually planning on adding ghost kitchens to those, which, you know, you can talk about the merits of those and why those are harmful, but that compounded with the new regulations means that this is in trouble. And right now, we're probably going to be the only one downtown that has this infrastructure. These currently do not, these are parking lots, and they don't have the sewer connects, and some of them don't even have water hookups at all. So that becomes important as we look to new spaces. This is the green loop, and the way we've been looking at this entire area is as a whole picture. One of my goals with the green loop too is that you shouldn't just travel around the green loop and experience places along it. You should also get off the green loop and go into neighborhoods and explore our Portland neighborhoods. And this is a great example of creating a loop off of the loop. What Art has done up here with Pride Plaza has created some traffic calming here. So there's a natural sort of like connection right up Harvey Milk to that plaza. But also I worked on one up here on Northwest 13th where we pedestrianized those spaces. And this flows beautifully into that, which allows you to travel right up from the green loop up through Pride Plaza, experience all the stuff on Northwest 13th, and then come down the New Flanders Greenway right back to the green loop, a small little loop into the Pearl District. Or conversely, you can do that into Old Town as well, down Flanders. And then we have these nodes essentially on the green loop between the park blocks that are opportunities for activations. So knowing that we can't put food carts in the middle here, and knowing that downtown right now is experiencing a lot of troubles when it comes to getting activity and small businesses back down there, we started looking at alternative ways of activating our spaces and our streets. And one way to do that would be through creating retail units and shipping containers. So we're going to try some of these out, we hope this year at the cart blocks, but they could provide important connections between Ankeny and O'Brien and even over to Pride Plaza, because they don't require the same sort of infrastructure that would be that the food cart would. So there's some other stuff that we're working on too around some ordinances downtown that prevent food trucks from operating. And there's some heavy restrictions on push carts, which Jennifer had a picture of in her presentation earlier. Though, if we can reintroduce those, we can lower the barrier to small business ownership and activate these streets in much more exciting ways. So I'll leave it there. Thank you, and happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Keith. We'll open up the Q&A. Put your questions in there. Chat is fine to put comments in, but if you want us to entertain your questions, keep them in the Q&A. So where to begin? Art, I'm curious, the plazas were funded by, in part by a lot of ARPA money. What is really the long-term future for those? How are you going to make them sort of sustainable?
Wow, you cut right to it, Randy. It's a dilemma. The current funding model, which is ARPA relief funds, has a ticking clock to it, and so really, the work we're doing around the plan for healthy business and healthy business plazas and the plaza space, hopefully, is the vessel that we can pour, potential investors' energy into. But we need to come up with a way where there's a willingness to co-invest in public space again. And there's a variety, cities all over the world have a variety of methods of doing so. Portland has less of those and less experience using those, but we have had conversations with the various ESDs. So that's the type of potential private investor that might contribute along with Green Loop and other infrastructure. There's also the potential for us to be looking at direct contributions from the city general fund, because a lot of the benefits accrue to private property and adjacent businesses and properties, and PBOT isn't funded through those revenue streams. So it's a true dilemma, and I think I'm really hoping we can keep the conversation excited enough in the coming months that people are willing to lean in collectively to the need for us to have a shared public space, and find a way to cobble together the near-term funding to keep the conversation going while we work on some of those bigger meta, questions. But you're cutting right to it. It's a dilemma for sure.
What are the cities you're most envious of in terms of funding streams and sustainability?
Interesting. Yeah. Well, I have some exposure to some examples actually in New York City. I've East Coast relatives. So New York City has many little mini ESDs that become little near neighborhood investment pools of pouring together some public money together with private money to have nice things. The High Line's a good example. But even cities like Philadelphia that don't have as much experience, their Parks Foundation is a major player in this space in terms of helping create and curate public space and managing beer gardens and all sorts of events all summer long. So I think there's a number of East Coast cities, I guess, that come to mind for me in the short term that I really sort of envy. And then I think we have the international examples. We go to Italy and you walk around a beautiful plaza, you don't realize the degree of intentionality that was brought to those spaces in terms of where those various private uses are, where the public uses are. And I think we have a lot of learning to do from how they co-invest into space and see that as basic infrastructure in a way that we really haven't historically.
Thanks for that.
Yep.
So from an anonymous attendee, there seems to be a strong focus on food carts and now outdoor retail space. Portland has so much vacant retail and office space. Is anyone looking at new ways to occupy existing buildings? Maybe some kind of cooperative leasing systems that could manage a large number of spaces that allow smaller businesses to start up. That might be a little out of your guys' range, but if you want to take it on, have ideas or are involved in discussions, would love to hear it.
I can say that what I've heard about space downtown is just that it's, getting into a typical lease structure that might be long-term in some time when it's uncertain, is preventing people from investing in downtown and taking a chance in downtown. So the reason I'm looking at these retail spaces is because you can create pop-up opportunities. You could be a little bit more nimble and take chances with it. But I absolutely agree. I think that we should be looking at the empty spaces and being as entrepreneurial as we can with it and taking chances on businesses and giving people opportunities wherever we can.
Jennifer, are you seeing parallel problems in the cities that you're working in and observing?
Absolutely. I'm based, I would say, mostly in Venice, California, and it has its fair share of dispensaries, pot tourism, high net worth individuals mixing with unhoused people. I mean, it's just like the term, the slogan is where art meets crime. And I feel like Venice is really, you know, the example of how those environments are kind of moving simultaneously together. And Los Angeles is certainly not at the forefront of public transportation. So, you know, you get a variety of automobiles mixed with scooters and occasional buses, and then some pedestrians. You know, I was interested in, just to go back for a minute to that whole question about like, how is, you know, what are we doing with these dead office spaces, and like what is going to happen in the future to all of these brick and mortar buildings that have been, you know, heavily invested in, and why can't there be more of a synergy between, you know, temporary mobility with kind of in concert with less static and more mobile. So I don't think it's an if then or, you know, one or the other. Like I could imagine that there's a startup or a pop-up, and that's how the food trucks started. You know, they had like someone tested their food idea or their kitchen idea, and then they found a permanent home because that's a much more expensive investment for most people. And then some of them, you know, kind of took on a new life, and then one person left that kitchen and then somebody else started their own cart. Now I'm starting to jump around, but I was curious about Keith's presentation with showing water waste. You know, it's always about infrastructure. Everything is infrastructure. Where is the water, the waste, and the power coming from and going to? And that's housing. You know, it's everything. You know, and how do we begin to solve that as a bigger concept? And there are certainly examples of that. You know, there are KOA or RV parks. You know, there's all of this idea that infrastructure exists already, and why can't we just tap into it as needed? And why can't things just plug in at will? There's also incredible new technologies that are developing. You know, water can now be pulled from the air. You know, we don't have to necessarily rely on just standard water. Why can't all of this water, then gray water systems can go back to watering plants that are already in the city? Food is more challenging because it tends to fall into the black water category. And what do you do with grease? So there are so many different segments of this conversation that are fascinating to me. And it's incredible what Portland has already done. And I really love the idea that it's not just a green ribbon, but it's like a fat, you know, worm that kind of expands and contracts, and it can then affect another part of the city. Like, why aren't we thinking about farming in the city? You know, vertical farming is such a concept now. Another term that comes to mind is something called acupuncture parks that we talk about in Los Angeles, where you take over just like a sliver of urban space and you plant, you know, what have you, and you grow that, and you know, feed yourself or feed somebody else, or, you know, at least just make it a little bit nicer. I don't know if I answered that question, but there's a lot to talk
There's
about
a lot
here.
there. I am curious with your experiences with food carts, both Art and Keith. So Keith explained, you know, some of the setbacks. I'm still a little bit confused as to if there's a market for gray and black water retrieval. Obviously, why there isn't expanded capacity for that in terms of these two providers that service downtown are overstretched. That sort of seems like an economic question, and I don't know if you have an answer to it, but I'd be curious because it seems to be a limiting factor, putting aside the additional cost of the food cart owners.
Keith probably has more granular understanding than I do of this part of it. Yeah, sorry.
Why are there only two? Is that the question, Randy?
Yeah, why there? If there's market, are you looking at? You've got demand. what about the supply?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's going to take some time to adjust. The problem is that you've got these two companies in the middle of a recession right now, and they're emptying the big tanks, and so they can plan those out. I mean, you know, that's going to be full soon, and you know, generally like 3 to 4 days before, or even more, that it needs to be emptied soon, so you can get it onto a schedule. Whereas if I had a busy day, and now all of a sudden my tank is full because my dishes, you know, I've been cooking and I'm cleaning my dishes, and now I need you to pick up tonight because I can't open tomorrow unless I have that emptied. That's where the problem comes in. And this is not attractive work. It's hard. It's hard work. It's really, I don't know if anyone smelled gray water, but I stepped in a lot of it when I was moving the carts out of Alder Street, and I still have nightmares about it. It's not great stuff. So it's not like there's a you know, a lot of people trying to get into it, but the companies that do it well. It's going to take them. So I've asked them what they think is going to happen when these regulations get enforced, and they're concerned because hiring more people is going to be on their list, and that's hard right now.
I have a question for Keith. So do the carts stay in place? They don't go back to a commissary at night and get emptied and cleaned out. They're
No, that's
essentially
that's what a
semi-permanent.
truck would do normally. These are actual trailers. It's sort of unique, maybe the Portland, and they're pretty stationary. You know, they don't tend to move very much. And I get calls all the time, like, can you bring your food car over for my event? Answer is no. I mean, like, they're gonna have to stow everything and then figure out the, you know, tow hitch. When we moved the carts out of Alder Street, some had been there 20 years. And I'm not joking, one had the tires melted into the pavement. Like, and we were like, how do we get this one out? It was, you know, crazy, but they are not as mobile as you think. And plus they're plugged into their, you know, into a connection, the 50 amp hookup. You've got all that kind of stuff that goes along with it too.
Right. Someone just said, I just saw the same thing. I was thinking, like, what about a porta potty? You know, I have had a trailer for many, many years down in Baja, California, completely off the grid. And, you know, when we needed the outhouse pumped, a truck shows up and, you know, and pumps it. A water truck shows up and when you need water or propane. I mean, there's lots of mobile entrepreneurs and systems out there that already exist to handle those.
Yeah, it's definitely something that if we were to do more of this, we would need. But I was gonna also say there's other problems too, which is that, you know, those food carts need to have an actual working restroom within so many feet of the food cart. And what that means is you can't put a porta potty there because you need hot water for hand washing. And so that's where it also becomes, that's why we installed those restrooms in there and got them working. And no joke, the night before we had the Multnomah County health inspector come in, I found out that Parks does not have hot water heaters in their restrooms. I had to install a water heater the night before. And it all came down to that as we were opening with Multnomah County, a temperature thermometer underneath that water, testing that we got it up to speed like 10 minutes before we opened. I'm not joking.
Well,
yeah, I believe that.
I want to pull the lens back a little bit from the food cart sort of arcania, and get a sense of from Art, what new things might we see in the streets? What are allowed and what is not going to be allowed?
Okay. Well, I think, you know, the way we're experiencing is each of these locations are their own little seed. And so it really, the inspiration, what form they take really depends on the adjacent community groups as well as adjacent businesses. And a lot of them right now are anchored by a healthy business permit. So there's local business leadership in a commercial district or in an area of downtown that is the beginning of this conversation. Or there's a civic group or an institution like the Portland Art Museum that wants to be the host of a further journey. And so it really is host specific. And so, you know, there's examples like a lot of collaboration with Vancouver, BC, they have examples of where the host is a community organization, working with addicted youth. That is going to, start to define the space. It could be a restaurant, it could be a retail establishment, it could be an arts organization. I mean, I think one of the challenges we have is, people seeing themselves in downtown other than when Rose Festival is occurring. How do we make it so that people see downtown Portland as the place they're holding events? The types of pop-up markets that we saw in Old Town over the last couple of years demonstrates the possibility of a different set of people seeing downtown as theirs, as a place where they're going to be hosting and making events happen. And so I guess, rather than framing what we're not going to see, I think what we are going to see, hopefully, is more and more people willing to put energy and investment into activating a public space, and seeing government and the city as an enabling partner who's trying to figure out what some of these roadblocks might be. Access to water, access to power and lighting, these various things. Our colleagues in the PMO office are doing a lot of really impressive work right now, trying to crack the code on how do we make these spaces more functional and more usable, when through years of disinvestment, we've been pulling back the access to power in various sites. And these are expensive investments. Like one plug in Old Town, it's a $50,000 investment that we're trying to grapple with right now. Do we spend $50,000 to activate one plug on a street? But that plug might be what makes it possible for a whole series of vendors next summer to decide that a site is a viable site. So I think that's, I'd like to see more live music as a musician. We're having conversations with Mira at Music Portland about, how can we make our, streets small pop-up music sites like that. I think music is one of the great sort of languages out there. And, I guess a key reminder just in general, we're competing with all of our living rooms all the time. I haven't been outside today. I don't know if other people haven't been outside today, but that can become what your day becomes unless there's a reason to get outside. And so these public spaces can be that reason for us to live a more fulfilled and more connected life. And so what we need to be doing is producing those spaces that people feel inspired and willing to go downtown and willing to go back in the office because there's something on their lunch break or after work. If we're not providing that, people are going to just all stay home, And so I think that's, the space that, I guess my hope is that people see downtown Portland, and in particular for this specific conversation, but public space and the public realm as something worth investing in for us to recover from, a couple of years of isolation.
Thanks, Art. I think there's a bunch of questions, and I think that in the Q&A that I think a lot of what you all said have touched on. So I'm not ignoring. I'm just kind of letting the conversation flow. Jennifer, I was really intrigued by the art to crime slogan in Venice, and I don't want to apply that to downtown Portland, but I want to point out that O'Brien, has some extremes in terms of economic disparities between neighbors, let's say. So on one side we have, the coming Ritz-Carlton. On the other side we have New Avenues for Youth. We have Central City Concern. We have the Behavioral Health Resource Center. And there's a lot of dimensions pulling, from those constituencies. And I'm wondering if you've seen in Venice or any place else where you think that those different sort of constituencies of society have been have mingled well in public space. Have there been interventions, programs, or anything that have actually helped both constituencies in some way?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that Venice Beach is probably the best example. I mean, I love the High Line in Manhattan. I was just there 2 days ago, but it's more at the high end than I would say at the low economic level. And it's very much dependent upon landscaping in the parks. I mean, it's really a landscape. So I would say Venice Beach is such an incredible example of this mashup of tourism, food, retail, the ocean, and then skateboarding. I mean, festivals, like, and then I was thinking, like, why can't it be more like Burning Man? You know, like, why can't Portland, like Burning Man has no infrastructure. It takes in and it takes it with it. Like, there is no electricity, you know, there's none of that stuff. So, you know, why can't our cities start to think a little bit more, you know, use their imaginations, and sort of like, we're so mired down by building code. I deal with it daily, and it's not really the way that most people exist. You know, some of this can be solved with housing, the downtown, not just hotels, not transient housing, but permanent housing, where there's a group of people that live down there and then, you know, want music and they want art and they want, you know, a social outdoor living room. The joy of New York City is the outdoors, not, you know, in someone's small studio apartment. Everyone's outdoors because they don't have a living room.
Keith, you've been living on the ground, you know, with the Ankeny, with the cart blocks, and have really seen, you know, the mix of life there. What do you think what are some lessons that you have learned that you think are applicable to O'Brien Square?
Sticking with it. Not that anyone's surprised, but like, it's hard. It's hard work. If we want to recover, you know, revitalize the city, it requires us to be down there and to do the work. And, you know, those cart owners are down there every single day, whether it's a $50 day or a $500 day. They're there for any business that will come there because they're building their businesses. I was going to mention something Jennifer said about the graduation process. We've already had one cart owner graduate into a brick and mortar space. So the owner of Kafta House, he and his brother owned it. He's already moved into, he's opened his own business in a hospital right now and serving food. So those kinds of things can happen. But the reality is downtown is tough to work in, and you have to be ready for that. And that means that you are ready for any surprises that come your way, that you keep the site in order and stay on top of it. And some of the problems start to go away, to be honest with you. Like I mentioned, when we first opened that up, we got tagged all the time. They were tagging everything. But as soon as you start taking it down every day, there's no point in that. And so then the site reclaims for, you know, the cart owners and the activity around it. But I'm not going to say it's perfect. It's hard work, and you just have to keep doing it.
Is there any specific changes though that have happened that were either, you know, came from the city or came from the cart owners that you think you know, we should be thinking about as we go forward? I mean, the tenaciousness is huge, and it takes a certain kind of mettle to do that. But are there, you know, you've been down there how many years now? And there were some really tough times, I know. But what has really been beyond tenaciousness? What are some changes that that have really been, you know, signal in making it a better place?
I mean, it's hard to say, but a couple things I've learned: we can't program our way out of this. If you're going to try to program a space, you're going to fatigue everyone. So we were doing a lot of, I mean, and by the way, I'm not just doing food carts, I'm doing active spaces in other parts of the city, and same sort of issues. And like we started doing an outdoor market, and we found that some of the vendors were just tired of outdoor markets because they're everywhere and they have to lug their stuff from one place to another. That's why the shipping containers came up, because, hey, now you have a sort of a semi-permanent place that you can store your stuff. You don't have to haul it all over the place, and you close it up at night in a metal container, and you open up in the morning, and there it is. That's definitely, and when you combine this, like, so those carts are there from 8 a.m. to 9, 10 p.m. at night, and they're seeing everything. And you know, they were able to spot someone not too long ago who was ODing and call someone and get someone down there to help them. I mean, that kind of thing is they're seeing this happening all around them, and caretaking that space. They are permanent caretakers in that space. I think that that's something that's helped out that site quite a bit. I mean, that has never been a destination for anyone in the city. Let's be honest. I mean, how long has that park been around? And you know, whoever went there, but now there are people going there, and having neighbors and community collaborators working with your community. That's the only way you're going to do this. We all have to do this together. Otherwise it will not work.
What are some regulations that you would like to see changed that you think will make easier to bring the plazas around O'Brien and within O'Brien work better? And that's to Keith or Art.
Art?
Well, I think Keith mentioned one that I've heard of is around the prohibition on mobile food vending. That I'm not sure when it originated, but maybe like the 60s. It's been on for a long time, and honestly, it's part of what produced the parking lot food cart, ecosystem, was the prohibition of having it be rolling up in Portland. So I think that's one that it does sound like there's a need for us to explore kind of what a new version of that is, that and maybe the mobile, the rolling carts, just because of the potential entrepreneur, small entrepreneur systems. So that's certainly one that comes to mind for me. I don't know, Keith, if there's others.
That and also the push cart one. I think that there's a high, you have to get sign off, but I think originally the food truck issue was just that they didn't want a food truck rolling up in front of my restaurant, right? And stealing my customers. And the way you sort of deal with that is you create designated spaces around the city and then allow people to park there through a permit. And we have no food truck inventory. It's very small. So that would be one way of building that back up. Some of the regulations around how we deal with this power and wastewater, Jennifer, you were talking about that. We need, I don't know. Like it's easy for me to say we need to be more flexible and entrepreneurial with ordinances and regulations, right? But there's reasons that they exist. And so I was going to say, I've got this one, let me just show you this real quick. This is a company that I spoke with very early on, and they have this, they essentially take food waste, they compost it, and they turn it into energy and biogas. And then the end result is food fertilizer, which I can, so I was thinking, look, this would be great for the food carts. You put one of these in between the carts, it powers one of them, and then, or one or two of them, and then from the waste that comes out of the food carts. And then we don't have to have propane anymore. We can use the biogas out of this. And then the end result, the fertilizer, I take it down a couple blocks to the Portland Farmers Market and give it to the farmers. I mean, what a great idea. And we showed this to BES, and it's not something I can install tomorrow, right? We have to prove this out a little bit. They are interested in it, but it takes time. So that's what I mean, is like, as we go through, or just trying to figure out like, hey, where can we put wastewater, like dump stations in the street? Probably not in the locations we choose, but we need to identify spots where this is possible.
What's each of your sort of dreamscape? If you could sort of have imagine the O'Brien that you would like to see in the streets surrounding, take us on a little tour of it. Who wants to jump in?
I think Jennifer should start.
I knew you were going to say that. I see it as, multi-pronged solution. I mean, I love what Keith just showed, because the shipping containers are terrific. They're really not built. They're made to move goods. It's a relatively new industry. It sort of popped up about 70 years ago. There's a great book out there called The Box, if anybody's interested in the history of shipping containers. Before that, that's not how goods moved around the world. But now it's a universally accepted mode of storage and transportation. And like in Cape Town, in South Africa, if you go down into the favelas, that's not the right term, but you understand what I'm saying. But you find shipping containers like in these communities that people, it's the place where you store things, you can lock things up, that's your safe business, and then housing is everywhere else. And like cell phone companies are really using shipping containers in these environments, which are incredibly successful, and everyone then can access it. So I see O'Brien as being like a series of different plugins. Like maybe there's a series of maybe containers that are for toilets and washing your hands and that kind of infrastructure, and that can be peppered throughout the park. Maybe there's this bio recycling center, and there's a couple of those, and then there's pop-up for new types of entrepreneurial goods or makers or art, or dance, or it's a very flexible, but with a series of permanent permanently positioned infrastructural components that allow all of this other life to exist around it.
Awesome. Anybody else want to take a swing?
Sure, I'll go next. Yeah, I think seeing the O'Brien Square as the center of an environment that is highly walkable, is set up in such a way that it is oriented towards place and staying and lingering, but also for people to pour individual energy into their creation. So some maker spaces, perhaps there's food cart or cart capabilities for that, but it's a space in which there's energy being poured in. There's sort of hope for downtown Portland being poured in and really lifted up as a space where someone can bring their individual inspiration, not really that different than perhaps a Burning Man-like environment, where we are getting systems out of the way and allowing people to bring their inspiration with some perhaps curation from Keith's assistance. But I think, yeah, creating this as a space of inspiration amidst, the need for a lot of that in downtown Portland right now.
How do you see Parks and PBOT working together on this? Because so far there's just been conversations, but not a real commitment to work together yet.
Right. I mean, I think at the staff level and at the mid-level staff level, there's been a lot of connection. We co-wrote that EDA grant together that got some additional funding for the Green Loop. The other part of that grant was for funding O'Brien Square. So, we weren't able to get as much funding as we were pursuing, but I think there's a lot of interest at the staff level. I think Nick Falbo spoke at one of your first events. He's a real leader within PBOT space. So I think there's excitement to explore this space. There is some real promise with the sort of reforming of Portland's form of government to provide a sort of a new palette for how we work together. So I think there's a lot of potential there. We do have to overcome some of those sort of standard feelings of here's where the edge of the park is and here's where the street begins, and we need a curb there, we need a sidewalk and a row of trees, or we'll end up having that, which maybe is fine for some portions of the city, but I think we have an opportunity to look a little bit bigger than that.
Keith?
What was the question on that? There's a couple that were out there. So
Your dreamscape.
What I see this at? So I'm looking at this in two ways. There's a short term and there's a long term. And the short term is, what do we need right now? And I think we need more activity downtown. And that means putting something there that doesn't replicate something nearby, and also has something in place that's permeable. I look at nearby is Pioneer Square. You've got some food carts on there, but it's programmable. They have events there. They draw a lot of people there. And then you have Director Park that's sitting there right now, completely empty, ready to be programmed, I'm sure, right? So what can we put there? And, I've always looked at Pioneer Square as our dining room. Living room, and O'Brien can be the dining room. for now, put some seating there. You got the food hall there, get some food carts in the middle, and use the cart. We have to evolve the carts too, by the way. It's a whole separate conversation. But the fact that they're not movable at all means that we need to look at those and evolve them. But for now, can we use them to build the kind of infrastructure you want in the long term? And so even at Ankeny West right now, all that infrastructure we put in, the 50 amp power, the water, even the gray water later, you can adapt that for something. If let's say we were to disappear tomorrow, you can hold events there. You've got power, you've got water, all that kind of stuff. So can you use something like the food carts for a stopgap to help boost our economy and build out infrastructure for something that's more long-term later on? That's kind of how I see these things. And I don't quite know what the long-term is. That's what you're for.
I want to read something. It's in the Q&A from Tim Smith, prominent architect and urban designer. Perhaps we should use the mutable infrastructure as a launch for a virtuous cycle strategy for O'Brien and nearby areas. First, we begin with highly flexible pop-up palette of options: food carts, play spaces, rec spaces, pop-up retail, cultural events, music, and exhibits, which could then leverage land use changes. Portland downtown needs more mixed-use neighborhoods, neighborhood fabric. Cities with healthy downtown residential populations have come back quicker than those like Portland, which don't. Leverage mutability to generate excitement that could result in a new investment in living and working neighborhoods around O'Brien, which could then leverage more permanent and active spaces and appropriate infrastructure. I think that's very much kind of what we're attempting to do here. So I have, my last question is for a seasoned bureaucrat, Art, because we do have this rather monumental change on the horizon. Jennifer, you might not know this, but we're going to change our form of government. And I won't get into the arcana of that, but there's a window here of basically another year and a half. And then we go into this transition, which we're not entirely sure how that's going to work, or how decisions are going to get made, or how quickly they will get made. And, it's kind of a big gray area out there. There's a lot of people working on trying to make as smooth a transition as possible. What do we need to get done immediately in order to have a sort of resilient strategy for that gap period?
Great question. I really feel like the change is already occurring. There's a ton of convenings happening within city now about form of government, preparing for next year's budget cycle, all those things. I think conversations like this, in which we are placing what good looks like out in front of this conversation, out in front of a series of new leaders that are going to be joining this council, a bigger set of those leaders. I feel like that is the answer, is concentrating on what good looks like, pouring hope and excitement into the city will lead the government processes to follow that excitement and that and hopefully leverage that, rather than sort of proceed with scarcity and fear, which amidst all the budget cuts that we've been going through, it's very hard for city staff to sort of stay in the hope cycle. But I thought that Tim's description is the kind of process that we need to do in multiple places throughout the city to try to sort of bring excitement, bring co-investment, bring the potential for people to be willing to put a little extra in to hopefully get a little bit more back. And we've sort of lost a lot of that interstitial tissue over the last couple of years, all hiding in our living rooms.
Okay, anything, any closing remarks the three of you would like to make?
My feeling is that Portland's already such a unique city, and there's so much, from the outside looking in, it looks like an incredibly progressive place to be. And the way that you've been thinking about multimodal transportation, is far superior to anything I've ever seen in any city in America. And if O'Brien becomes, an example of something that is so unique and interesting, and it becomes, you know, the starter kit for everything else that will come in planning of the city. That would be, you know, that wouldn't take much, you know, something that huge amounts of shipping containers that have kind of been rethought in different ways and different examples of how they're being used. It has a recycling, upcycling component to it, and it's very doable within that time period.
Right. Anybody else?
The news of Portland's death was vastly premature. We're not done yet, people. For this 61 people still on this call, let's you know, chart this next chapter. Let's make it happen.
Okay. Well, I hope you all can join us Wednesday for our next discussion, Just Space Beyond Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in Design. We'll have Damon Rich from Hector and Newark, New Jersey, and Camille Hassanain from Colocate, a really interesting firm that is based in Portland and in New Orleans, and Kelsey Snook, who's an experienced designer, very large scale project. So it should be a great discussion, and hope to see everybody March 8th at the old Finnegan's at 880 Southwest Washington. So good night, everyone, and thank you for a great discussion. Really enjoyed it, and we'll see you in a few days. Okay. Good night.